Hi, this is Thomas Blood. I'm an enterprise strategist with AWS. I've been with AWS for a little over 18 months, and I want to share with you today some examples and experiences around leadership, especially around cloud transformation, based on my personal experience as a customer and now as an enterprise strategist. So we'll talk about what the issues are, how to start, how to build a foundation, then how to gain speed and traction, and then finally how to reinvent. And I'll leave you with some next steps that you can take that hopefully you can enact on pretty quickly. My background, so I've been doing IT-related work for over 20 years. I also spent some time in the U.S. military. I've done anything from software development to managing data centers to cloud architecture. So I have a pretty wide range of experiences. In 2014, I was working at Experian, and we wanted to move one of our business units into the cloud. And in that context, I learned a great deal about what works and what doesn't work in a cloud transformation. So one of the things I want to highlight is that although I'm going following a script here, following a slide deck on how to go about this, it's not one prescriptive path. There are many paths. And so one of the takeaways that I want you to leave with is that there are many ways to get to the goal, and you may be coming in different stages, and you may be following a different path than the one that I'm describing here, but the key elements and the patterns tend to be the same across the board. I thought this was a very illustrative comic of what's going on. We try new things, and people are afraid of new things. They're afraid of change. And so I think this speaks very much to what our experience is when we begin a cloud transformation or a journey of this kind. So let's start with leadership. Leadership is sort of the core to this presentation, and I like this quote: "Leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal." I really like it, but I wanted to add the caveat "against great odds," because to me that speaks to having skin in the game. It speaks to personal risk-taking. It speaks to really achieving something that's a challenge. It's a challenging effort. And I think that's an important addition to what leadership is. So I came out of the military, and this is kind of how leadership is defined in the military. You want to influence and lead people who are doing things that they may not necessarily want to do. And in a way, leading a cloud transformation is a similar beast, because there's a lot of challenges along the way. People don't necessarily want to go where you're leading them, and so it takes this influencing to get them to go there. I also want to differentiate between leadership and management. So leadership is about creating direction, inspiring people, coaching people. Management is equally critical and important, but it's really about keeping the trains on time, focusing on planning and budgeting, organization and staffing, maintaining order essentially, where the leadership portion is about change. And so sometimes people conflate the two. They mix management and leadership into one bucket. And if you follow a management approach to a change management process, to a cloud adoption, it gets very difficult, because you're intrinsically going to challenge the assumptions, and you're going to challenge how things are done. And that requires change and leadership. You also have to understand where you're going and why you're going there. This is about vision. And I talk to companies, mostly in Europe, and many of them have a very vague idea. They might have a slide somewhere that they got from the board of directors that says cloud first, or go cloud native, or go into the cloud, or innovate. That's a bit nebulous, and so I think it's important to have a really clear understanding of where you're going and why you're going there, and is it appealing? Is it the right thing for your business? And then the next step to that is, how can you actually realize that vision? And it's that realizing that vision that is challenging, or can be challenging. Once you have your vision defined, you have an idea of where you're going and why you're going there. The next phase of this piece is merging the business strategy and the IT strategy. People often talk about what's your cloud strategy, and I think it's a little misleading, because cloud strategy is really a component of a larger IT strategy, which enables the business strategy. Those things all have to work together, which is why I described them here as a Venn diagram. And you have to have very good communication between the business and the IT leadership to really define and understand what the strategies are and how you're going to accomplish them. So if you're moving into the cloud and you're trying to save costs, for example, IT has to understand and align how they're going to make that happen to accomplish the business outcomes. And I'll talk more about outcomes in a minute. We find that one of the very, very critical steps in a cloud transformation journey is actually securing your executive sponsorship. In part because you need that the voice of the executive to be able to amplify the message that you have. You may need to call upon them to remove obstacles. It is really helpful to have an executive signal intent by having a very clear statement that says, for example, yes, organization, yes, company, we are in fact going into the cloud. You may have to escalate. You need an escalation path. You need authority, and the best way to get authority is to have someone delegate it to you. There are other ways to assume authority, but that is really the easiest and the fastest way to do that. And then you may need their peer network. You may need the executive to help you traverse laterally across the organization to help educate other executives, maybe in other business units or in other functional areas. So this executive sponsorship is extremely important, and you need to spend time securing that in one-to-one conversations with the executives. So assuming you have executive sponsorship, you have a vision, you know where you're going, at that point you'll build a business case. So when I went through this process, a colleague and I, we wrote a business case that was really about business agility. We wanted to enable the business to go faster, to react to the market more rapidly. When we had a cost component in there, but the cost was really not our primary driver. But again, it depends on your business strategy. What are you trying to accomplish? So typically you see all of these components in the business case. The importance, the relative importance of each one of them might be different. And you know, we have, AWS has professional services teams that can help you build out the business case if you need help with that, as well as partners that can help you with that as well. So when you talk about this leadership, I threw these words out because I was trying to define what are you looking for in a leader, in a transformational leader. And this is a challenging role because you're sitting maybe between business and IT on the one hand, so you're a translator. You may have authority that's been delegated to you, you may not. In many ways, you're going to mitigate and negotiate struggles between different groups and organizations within the company. And so you have to have this very interesting mix of skills and personality traits, definitely empathetic, being able to understand where people are coming from, so a high EQ. It's an ambassadorial role where you might communicate with other members and other organizations within the business, and you have to translate in a way that is understandable to all members. And it requires boldness, it requires courage, because undoubtedly during this process, the transformational leader will have to go up against established wisdom, established procedures, political dimensions in the organization, and it requires just a really good sense of self and a strong sense of self and some courage to actually mix things up a bit. You might challenge people that are superior and senior to you in the organization. So how do you get started? Before you get started, you really have to understand that the technology portion of a cloud transformation is actually, in a way, the easiest part. The part that is really difficult to transform is the culture. And the culture, I like this phrase, culture as a software of the mind. The culture exists based on the past experience of the organization. It's comprised of quote-unquote tribal knowledge. Some written down, some codified, some not, some just in the vernacular and the heads of people that have been there for a long time. And in that culture, both the visible and the invisible portion of the culture can be very, very difficult to change and influence. And of course, the culture exists to help in its current form to help move things along and to drive the organization. So if you've been driving along in a certain path for 30 years or 20 years, your culture is optimized to meet that path. And when we talk about a transformation, you may be changing direction. And when you change direction, you are going to change portions of that culture. One of the ways to help you with this cultural transformation is to have what we use at AWS Tenets. Tenets are a belief or a simply defined concept that you can use as a way to influence your decision making. It provides clarity for decisions. It's a shortcut, a shorthand for moving to decision a lot faster. I'll give you some examples. So for example, you build it, you own it, or you build it, you run it. We talk about 2 pizza teams. I'll talk more about what 2 pizza teams are. But in that process, you own everything you build. You become operations and support and maintenance all rolled into one. That has implications about how you do things and how you negotiate and how you communicate. I like the tenet, get out of the way. Enable teams to do what they need to do as a leader and then get out of their way, because they will go very quickly and they can make decisions very quickly without the leader having to interfere or getting in the way. At Amazon Web Services, or at Amazon in general, we have very well-defined leadership principles. And it's the same idea. With leadership principles clearly defined up front, it makes decision-making and communication a lot easier. So at Amazon, we have 14 of these. We start with the customer obsession, working backwards from the customer, and we end, our last one is deliver results. And they kind of speak, both of them speak to customer obsession. And the ones in between are how we do it, how we get there. And so I want to highlight a couple, but for example, have backbone, disagree, and commit is a core tenet or core leadership principle that I personally found a little challenging when I got here. And it's this very interesting thing where you have to be willing to argue with your teammates and maybe your leaders and your executives about important matters in your cloud transformation. And that can be uncomfortable, right? But the point is, when you argue, when you hash things out, sometimes with strong words, without being offensive, you actually come out of a better place because you hear all the opinions, you hear all the concerns, and from that you generate a better decision. And once you've come up with that better decision, there are still probably members on the team who still disagree, but at that point, once you come to a decision, they commit to executing in according with that decision. It's an extraordinarily powerful principle. And so you want to be deliberate about how you do these things. Culture should be deliberate. It shouldn't be an accident. And so one way we do that at Amazon is we have these leadership principles. So I encourage you, these are good examples. You have your own, but I encourage you to develop your own leadership principles, and you can start by copying these if you like. So when you get started with the cloud transformation, you obviously can't do this on your own. A leadership without a team doesn't make much sense. So what does that initial team look like, right? And when I went through this process, and when others that I've spoken with have gone through this process, they've identified individuals in the organization who are already known as the go-to people. These are the people that get things done. You know who they are. Everyone wants their time. And again, this is one of the reasons why you need executive sponsorship, because you want to get those teams 100% dedicated in your initial team. This can't be a part-time job. They have to be all in. And the only way to get them all in is to tell other organizations or other teams in the organization that they will not have access to them. That requires executive sponsorship. These are people that are risk takers themselves, risk takers in a good sense, right? They want to try things, they want to experiment, they believe in the vision, they're definitely driven by results and outcomes, and they're generally well respected. You want people who are generally well respected because it'll help evangelize and grow over time. This is a journey, and sometimes the maps on our journey aren't very accurate or precise or current. And so I think it's very, very important to get help as early as possible. So you may need a partner in our partner ecosystem or from professional services to help navigate the terrain. And there's different areas that we commonly see. So one would be around technology, cloud architecture, how to implement and set up your DevOps organization and processes like CI/CD. Another one that's very, very common and necessary is the security and compliance piece. And a third general bucket might be change management. How do you actually get help doing this cultural transformation and the communication related to change management? So when I went through this process at Experian, we brought in a partner who was extraordinarily helpful. Yeah, it was, we integrated them completely in the team. This was one person that worked on the team every day, and a second architect who came in once a week to do an architectural review with us. They helped us set up guardrails so we wouldn't do things that might cause harm in the process. We had never done anything in the cloud before, so having a partner who had already traversed this terrain before was really, really helpful. So you have your team, you have hopefully a partner with you on the team, and then you start your first workload. And this first workload should be something that's customer-facing or has business value. This is not something that you would do as an experiment to throw away after you're done. You want skin in the game. You want skin in the game all the time throughout this transformation process. And by having a customer-facing and business value-driven project to work on, you have skin in the game. You have to deliver results to the business that's measurable. A common practice is to start something smaller and definitely something that is hard enough that you can learn. But there are others who will pick the hardest thing they can find on the premise that everything afterwards will be easier. So you see the full spectrum here. But my recommendation is if you're first getting started, pick something that's small enough that you can get it done quickly and something that you can learn from. For Amazon and Amazon Web Services, security is job zero. This is where we focus most of our attention before we do anything else. And so I recommend the same to our customers. When I went through this process, I took my CISO out to lunch, and I told him that, in addition to shadow IT that was in the business, there was some fear around security, and I wanted to address that up front and partner with the CISO and bring in security expertise from the very, very beginning in the cloud transformation so that the business could rest assured that we were doing things in a secure and compliant manner. And when you do this early up front with your CISO as a partner, you can start to leverage some of the great benefits of security automation that are otherwise hard to accomplish. And during the compliance and security process, you want to automate as much of this as possible. You want to use security testing as much as possible. And you're going to have a little bit of a challenge probably with mapping your existing security policy against the cloud security policies. So this is a bit of a challenge, and again, this is where you need to work very closely with your CISO to create a translation between those. Usually that means you have to find mitigating controls, and you can map them out so that, again, the business can rest assured that what you're doing is done in a compliant and secure manner. Another core component, I think, for organizations, and this is in general, is that the time of waterfall is probably coming to an end, except for those applications and those systems that are mission critical or healthcare related applications or safety related applications and systems where a traditional waterfall methodology might benefit the process. But I would say otherwise, go agile. And if you haven't gone through an agile transformation, now is the time. And you can combine it with your cloud transformation. If you're going to transform the organization to leverage the cloud, you might as well leverage agile as well. DevOps, I think, is a superpower, rocket fuel for the organization. And again, this is about automating everything all the time. It's about reducing friction in the processes. And it's also about establishing guardrails so that developers, for example, don't have to think so much about some core security principles. They should be baked in already into the DevOps process through templates that can be reused, that the security team can sign off on, and that your team can then leverage. When you enable the DevOps mentality, this is really a philosophy more than a job title, you get extraordinary benefits in cycle time, in repair time. And just to give you some examples of what those are, there's a new book out called Accelerate that Gene Kim co-authored with Nicole Forsgren and Jess Hubble. And they analyzed data from Puppet Labs research over the last 4 or 5 years, which had interviewed hundreds or maybe even thousands of enterprise customers. And they define in this book a very rigorous statistical analysis methodology. And so these findings, I think, are really, really grounded in some really solid science and academic research. So you look at these numbers, they're very, very encouraging. 440 times faster lead time from commit to deploy, that's worth real money to any organization. So do yourselves a favor and embrace DevOps across the organization, and definitely in preparation and during the cloud transformation. Something that is critical as well is when you go down this path, and again, it can be a challenging path, whenever you have a win or victory, you deliver something to your customers, for example, using cloud transformation, cloud methodologies, cloud native applications, or a migration, celebrate those wins and celebrate them so that people know that you've accomplished something. This is a moment of pride and a moment of joy, and the teams that do this very hard work should know that what they're doing is valuable. So celebrate a little bit, go have a party. Go take them out for dinner or something afterwards. All right, so you've started with your initial process and your initial project. After some time, after kicking the tires, after learning the basics, you're going to build out your foundation. And one component of your foundation should be a cloud center of excellence. There's some really good content online that we can send you links to after this presentation. But the idea is that you have an organization, a team, and this is a small team, this could be 6 to 12 people, that enable the rest of the organization to go faster. Right? So you have an engineering component where you're doing infrastructure, automation, operations, security. But they also have a cloud business office component. This is the portion of the team that faces back into the business organization, that communicates back into the business, back and forth between the business and IT. You may educate business how to do agile, how to communicate, how to bring workloads back into the IT organization. And this Cloud Center of Excellence does things including building and defining the reference architectures for the enterprise, building and automating governance structures, engaging in training for the whole organization, communicating with the finance office on what this all means and managing cost, and also has a pretty significant role in the organizational change management. Now you had your initial team, and that initial team essentially was a two-pizza team, but now as you're building out the foundation, you're going to add more two-pizza teams. So what's a two-pizza team? Well, as the name implies, it's the size of a team that you can feed with 2 pizzas, so 6 to 8, maybe 12 people. And you would comprise them. These are essentially full-stack teams. Depending on the workload that you're working on or the function they serve, they will be comprised differently. But typically, you would have infrastructure, DevOps engineers, security engineers, application developers, ops people, and an architect in there. And there may be other permutations of this. As you go down this path, as you're building out the foundation, as you're getting better at managing and operating in the cloud, you will run into resistance. And the resistance comes out in many different forms. I like to refer to it as corporate antibodies. Resistance comes often out of a place of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD. And as a leader, you have to be able to differentiate between the FUD and actual real concerns. So again, this is where this EQ component of leadership comes in, because you have to discern and understand where people are coming from when they're criticizing or attacking or maybe even undermining what you're trying to do. It's not that they're necessarily determined to thwart your efforts. It's more that they're worried for the business and they're afraid that what you're doing is really risky. And so when you differentiate, when you identify the difference between the fear, uncertainty, and doubt and the concern, if it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt, then it becomes an education problem. You want to just educate and clarify and demystify any cause of fear that might exist. And we can talk about what those might be in a moment. If it's an actual concern, say around security or compliance, well then dig in and seize the opportunity to learn from whoever the person that has voiced the concern about what the underlying issues are, analyze, understand the problem, and then come up with a solution. And you will always find a solution with your team to solve these kinds of concerns. Having said that, sometimes you need to escalate to the executive sponsor, and you might have a situation where you just can't overcome the fear, uncertainty, and doubt for whatever reason, and you may just have to have an executive say, well, I heard your fear, but we're going forward anyway. And on the other hand, if you find a concern and you have maybe not the time to really address it properly, you might just accept the risk explicitly and say you're going to revisit that issue, that particular issue at a later time. Tread lightly on this. You don't want to exhaust your executive sponsor, so only escalate when you really have to. This should not be a path of convenience. This should be a path that you have to go to move forward. In general, when you're dealing with these obstacles, deal with them as they come up. You can't. Some customers like to anticipate every possible problem that might exist in the future and have a plan on how to deal with it. It just takes too long to do that. So you want to deal with the obstacles as they arise. Instead of trying to solve any possible problem that might exist someday in the future. I see companies and organizations planning every possible contingency, and it just takes too long. So it's a better approach to just deal with the obstacles as they come up. You want to definitely leverage the expertise that we already have in your account manager and your technical account manager. They've probably seen the problem before, and they might have a very easy way to solve it. And then whenever you solve a problem, try to solve it in such a way that you turn it into a mechanism so that you can repeat similar problems in the future the same way. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And definitely don't boil the ocean. Do this in small steps as things come up. One additional role you have in your leadership is to educating the organization. You might be the chief change agent in the organization during cloud transformation. So you want to create opportunities for learning wherever you can. You want to shout loudly about what's going on. Have your executive team do a webinar every month or so and talk about what's happening in the cloud transformation. Talk about the victories, talk about the challenges. Just be very upfront and transparent about it, but communicate constantly about what's happening. You can set up a wiki, set up a place where people can learn more, right? So this is organic. Your team can contribute to the wiki and post content so that people, when they want to learn more, they have a place to go. And you provide them with the content that you've approved and you agree with and aligns with the vision and the direction you've taken. Have lunch and learns. Organize moments where you have teams come in or an individual come in and coach on what's happening in DevOps or what's happening in security. How do you leverage microservices so that people are going to be interested about this, have a place to go to learn more about what's happening. So I give you lots of examples here of the things you can do. So educating the organization is a really important portion of this leadership challenge. And then finally, take your teams to events, allow them to go to conferences. You want to learn from others, and reInvent is a great place to do that. reInvent, we have tens of thousands of people show up every year, and we learn from each other. Most of the presentations are done by customers, and they share their experiences around specific topics and workloads and examples. It's a great place to learn and be inspired. And then let's talk a little bit about the traditional way of doing things. Traditionally, we've organized ourselves around projects. So projects have a beginning and an end. They have a defined budget. They have a defined scope. and you usually compose teams for the duration of the project. And when the project is done, the teams go back to the general pool of resources until they are assigned to a new project. So this has worked very well for us for a very long time, but it doesn't really align very well with this, with cloud and with the idea around two pizza teams, small teams, nimble teams, being agile. So we found, and many others have found, that alignment around product is actually much more conducive to this new workload and this new world of cloud technology. It allows continuous development. You have ownership within the team around the product. Sometimes product teams might actually have P&L for the product. You work backwards from the customer, and most importantly, you're working against output and outcomes. So it's an outcomes-driven process. Another method that works is having a business objective. So my colleague Mark Schwartz talks about this in a book, and I'll give you the title for the book at the end of this. But instead of working against a product, for example, let's say you're in the government, maybe you don't have a product per se, you can operate and drive against KPIs, against measurable outcomes. You could say, you know, what's my customer acquisition number, or what are the number of VA cases I've closed per time interval. And then you optimize against that KPI. So your organizing principle here is always going against whatever that metric is, and then you can leverage whatever measures, whether it's software development or a process improvement or whatever it takes to accelerate that adoption of that KPI or of reaching that goal. And so when you go down this process, I think you want to de-emphasize the project mentality, just as you want to de-emphasize the waterfall methodology. Another thing that you'll have to do as a leader is hiring and bringing talent on board and providing training opportunities. So when you do this, what works really well for companies that are successful in this cloud transformation is partnering with HR as early as possible. You know, HR obviously has the job of finding talent and growing talent and nurturing talent, but HR often also has a role in defining what the culture should be. So partner with HR as early as you can so that you can cultivate this culture that you want. Sometimes one of the challenges that I had personally was convincing HR that maybe I have to pay a little bit more upfront for the right talent, and our job descriptions were maybe not perfectly aligned with what we were trying to do in cloud. A lot of job descriptions are still anchored in what is called an I-type person, someone with great depth of knowledge in one particular topic. And more in DevOps and in cloud adoption, what you really want is a T-shaped person, quote unquote. So a T-shaped person has depth in one area, or maybe two areas, and it's a pie-shaped person. And the bar across represents breadth of experience, the ability to collaborate, the ability to work together in a team. And that actually turns out to be part of the accelerant in this new methodology, this new approach. You also want to think about what are the career paths for all the employees in the organization. If you go into a cloud-native architecture, maybe the role of a database architect or a database engineer changes because you may not have as much reliance on traditional relational databases. Maybe you're building out more services with NoSQL. So how do you communicate the career paths for all the engineers? It's a very critical question, and you should spend some time thinking through what that looks like. A lot of the fear that you will hear coming out is exactly that. What is my career path going to be? How does cloud adoption affect me personally, whether I'm a sysadmin, a networking engineer, or even in the CFO's team around finance? So have some clarity around what that looks like and think through how people will grow their career paths during this cloud transformation. Again, critically important throughout of this is the communication and transparency throughout. So I think having the ability to communicate clearly what is the vision, what are the goals, what are we trying to accomplish, and then tying metrics to it publicly, having dashboards up on the walls that show what the costs are, for example, or what your velocity of your teams are, or what your defect rates are. All of that transparency builds trust in the organization. So when you're doing something as massive potentially as a cloud transformation, you need to build trust. And the way to build trust is to have total transparency around what you're trying to do. You also want to pay attention to what people are saying in the hallways. You know, sometimes you will hear comments that are poorly informed or misinformed, and you want to jump right on that and say, no, let me clarify this, you misunderstood something. Because if not, these rumors can actually fester into massive disinformation and continue to stoke the fear that might exist in the organization. So really pay attention to what people are saying around the water cooler, in the hallways, and encourage your teams to dispel any myths as they come up. In a way, you want to control the narrative. You want to be able to tell the story and celebrate and tell the story from your perspective. This is a continuous education. You want to constantly showcase what's going on, constantly clarify, and constantly teach people around what cloud actually means. And one important component of this is creating a place of trust and being able to foster curiosity. You want people to ask questions, and you want to be able to answer those questions. So encourage people to ask questions, even if they're uncomfortable, because the more you can bring their fears out and address them in public, the better off the whole organization will be. So once you've built out your foundational capabilities and you kind of know what you're doing, you have your DevOps practices in place, now it's time to step on the gas. You want to go faster. And one way to go faster is you want to scale the teams. So I call this team mitosis. So sorry, this diagram is a bit of an eyesore. My apologies. But the idea behind it is simply this. You start with that additional team and you add individual developers to the team every sprint. I added 1 per sprint. A colleague of mine added 4 per sprint. But you're bringing in more people from the rest of the organization every sprint. And the team then educates and trains and showcases to the newcomers how things are done in this new world, in this cloud world. And every time your team then grows beyond a 2-pizza team size, so now you may be 14 people, you can split the team and you have 2 teams. And you repeat this process over and over and over again. And over time, you get more and more people from the organization into these new structures, into the 2-pizza teams, and into this new way of thinking. And when you think about adopting a cloud, at some point you're going to ask yourselves, what do I do with my legacy applications? And obviously the answer here is migration. So we have a variety of migration patterns that we talk about. There are 6 of them. We call them the 6 R's. So the first one is a rehosting, lift and shift, as it's commonly known. And the idea is you simply take your application, maybe it's a traditional 3-tier application, and you rehost it in the cloud. We recommend that the first time you do this, you do it manually. You kind of learn how to do this, so you understand what the steps are, what the processes are. And then once you understand the principle, then you can automate the process and move very quickly. The second one is replatforming. This is lift and reshape, or as we call it, lift, tinker, and shift. And so here you might, swap out a database or optimize a process. You're still moving things into the cloud. You're still lifting, but you might be tweaking things along the way. One very effective thing to do is to think about, well, what can I replace with a purchase, a SaaS solution that I might integrate. And if you do that, you can maybe let go of some of your older systems that have reached their end of life. The perhaps most rewarding and most difficult is re-architecture. This is when you're actually rebuilding applications from scratch, leveraging cloud-native application and technologies, leveraging the 129 services that we currently offer in AWS. This is when you get into the microservices world, when you get into maybe serverless applications, and it gives you a lot of freedom and velocity in the organization and in the marketplace. One really, really great way to migrate is to retire. And we find commonly within organizations that have done this that there's maybe 10% of your applications can just be turned off. You have systems sitting in the data center that people have forgotten are there. They're still running. People are maintaining them, they're patching them, but there's actually no utility to them. So just turn them off. And then a small set might remain at the very end of this that you have to retain, and so you can revisit it at a later time. Throughout this process, again, this is not a solo journey. Throughout this process, you're going to have to build out alliances. And again, this is kind of a foundational statement, but you have to understand what each stakeholder needs. You have to understand who they are, what pain points they might have in the organization. And as you're going through the cloud transformation, look for opportunities where your efforts in cloud adoption can actually help solve pain points for individual stakeholders. For example, perhaps you have a compliance team that is doing a lot of manual review around security and compliance. Is there an opportunity to automate some of that process and accelerate the compliance team in their efforts? You'll be surprised as you go through this. There are many, many touch points where what you're doing in terms of cloud transformation can actually benefit the various stakeholders in surprising ways. So ask around, understand what their concerns are, and look for those opportunities to help them accomplish what they need to accomplish. You build trust again, you build alliances. When you need help, they will come and help you just like you've helped them. Over time, you will find other teams that are interested in what you're doing. When we went through this process at Experian Consumer Services, our sister organization in the UK saw what we were doing and wanted to do what we were doing. So we invited them into our team, we coached them, we did some training, and then we shared with them our infrastructure as code and our practices, and off they went on their own. And you wind up scaling and growing through the organization through sort of an organic process of coaching more and more teams. It has a bit of a viral effect. There's maybe a tipping point. We think maybe 10% of people trained in the organization in a new way of doing something is a tipping point for the rest of the organization to follow. And you will see this pattern. You will see people asking you, how can I leverage what you've done? How can I become faster? How can I become more agile? How can I save money? And you become the coach to those teams. So once you've migrated your estate, you have your foundation in place, you really understand, you have a good solid understanding of how to operate and develop and innovate in the cloud, that's when you get to the reinvention piece. And I was debating with myself whether this slide should come in earlier than reinvention around chaos engineering, and so you could do chaos engineering a lot sooner. Remember I said in the very beginning everyone has their own path and it's not really sequential. But I think this is an important component to your reinvention process. I love this idea of chaos engineering because if you can anticipate failure modes in your organization, they will happen at some point. So build them build your system so that you can be resilient against these failure points. And one way to test that is to actually have a very disciplined approach to break things on purpose and to see how your system behaves. So here's a very nice little book that describes this. There's lots of literature around chaos engineering. You definitely want to look at some of the things that Netflix has done in this space. But it's another superpower. It's another approach to building out really resilient systems. And part of that is also having security red teams, aggressive security teams that are trying to break into your system because others are definitely trying to break into your system. So you might as well be you that breaks in and finds the vulnerability first so you can fix it. You want to take benefit from new data architectures. You know, in the past, many of our applications have been standalone with standalone data stores with a variety of schemas, maybe around customer. You might have applications that have the same person as a customer, and you don't know it. So think about where your data resides and where it is currently, and think about what's possible. If you can liberate the data out of the existing traditional data stores and bring them into a data lake and into S3, then you can liberate this data and build new applications that maybe you even couldn't imagine doing. You know, everything becomes a sensor or a source of input into the data lake, and on the other side you can apply many, many different methodologies and tools to analyze, understand, and build new applications with that data. Just to put some color behind this, so C-SPAN, everyone's favorite TV channel, C-SPAN records the proceedings in Congress, and they have a database of about 99,000 people that are in front of Congress or have been in front of Congress over time. And the idea was that as a public good, they would index each hour of video so that consumers and customers and people citizens can find particular segments by a particular speaker doing a debate or a speech. In the past, this was a manual process, but last year at reInvent, we talked about recognition as one of our services, and C-SPAN took the opportunity, and in 3 weeks they built a system leveraging recognition to automatically index all of their footage in a third of the time that it normally takes, all for our benefit. So I think this is a really good example of leveraging, once you're already in the cloud, leveraging the systems that are there, leveraging services that AWS brings to bear. Another example is Edico Genome wanted to leverage FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, to accelerate the analysis of the genome of individual humans. In the past, this would have cost, in the distant past, not the distant past, $100,000 or more, maybe $1 million when they first started this. But now, because of this massive parallelization and leveraging technology in AWS, they were able to drive down the cost for each genome to $3 in compute time. That doesn't account for the other software analysis tools, but just in compute, driving the cost down to $3 per genome is extraordinary. So this brings me to the end of the presentation, and there's some key things that I want you to take away with this. So one, I love this slogan, think big, start small, go fast, because it encapsulates sort of the whole thing for me. But critically, have the courage to change. This is a really tricky thing. You know, as IT professionals, as IT departments, in the past, the last 20 years, we've been the department of no, or the department of not now, or the department of it's not secure enough. And we've basically trained our business and our product teams to be cautious in asking for help and asking for things. We've trained our product teams to go find solutions outside of IT with shadow IT. And we've maybe even trained our teams to assume that things cannot be done. And I think we need to change that and have the courage just to imagine a future and just to tell our product colleagues, if you had no constraints, what would you build? And then come back to IT and we'll figure out how to do it. And given this new environment, given DevOps, given cloud technology, given the richness of AWS, essentially, if you can imagine it, we can build it. Know where you're going, understand the vision, and understand the why of where you're going. Ask for help, leverage partners, build out those alliances within the organization. Take an active role in cultivating the culture you want. Culture should not be passive. It should be something that you create for a reason and purpose. Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions. Bureaucracies exist for a good reason. They are codified solutions to past problems, and that's good. But we need to periodically revisit them and say, does this still make sense? And importantly, experiment, try things. The cost of failure in AWS is so small that you want to encourage your teams to try new things constantly. And when they succeed, you can scale them up very, very quickly. I have a few next steps for you. First one is start. If you haven't built anything on AWS before, go do it. Just imagine some project or go find a tutorial and build something. Just build it. I encourage you to read our enterprise strategy blog where our team, there's 7 of us, write content on a fairly regular basis that can clarify some of these topics I've talked about today. If you have the opportunity, attend an awesome day, or maybe you can schedule one with us. Definitely look for events around you, AWS events. Maybe look for meetups. Look for opportunities to exchange ideas and best practices with others. And definitely do yourself a favor and go to reInvent. It is such an inspiring thing. The first time I went, I was blown away. I thought I was a big thinker, and I went to reInvent, and I came back, and I said to myself, I am thinking too small. So be inspired, go to reInvent. And then look for all the online training. We have lots of training courses. We'll add some context and links at the end of this for you to learn more about how to do AWS, how to leverage AWS for your projects and your efforts. And definitely reach out to us. We want to help you. We want to be your partner. We want to assist in your cloud transformation. I have a couple of books that I want to recommend. So the Phoenix Project, you probably have heard of it before. It's really a good method to educate your executives who may be not technical on what the challenges are. It's a novel, so it's really a fun read actually. So I've given this to executives in the past and they've read it over a weekend and it really clarified some things for them. Think about microservices if you can. Microservices are really a great way to accelerate. Think about how you can run your organization in a lean methodology framework. And we have a collection of what other enterprise customers have done. So Stephen Orban recently published a book, Ahead in the Cloud. It has really excellent examples of what other customers have done in AWS and the challenges they've overcome and how they've overcome them. And I mentioned earlier Mark Schwartz, colleague, he was the CIO of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. And he's written two really interesting books, one about what is business value actually mean and how do you use it to drive your business forward. And the second one tackles the question of if you're a CIO, what's your role at the table and how do you leverage your strategic input in an organization. It's a really good read. It's really thought-provoking. I highly recommend it. I want to leave you with this quote, which basically you want to enable the creativity and the innovation of people in your organization. So make it easy for them. Unleash their creativity. I love this quote. It's about enabling the organization to ask what if and then go do it. And with that, I thank you for your attention and I'm happy to answer any questions we might have using our chat. Thank you.